Hi everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to Manage Your SLES Machines at Scale with Azure Arc and Azure Automanage. My name is Ryan Willis and I'm joined today by Alfred Sin, and we're going to talk to you about Azure Arc, Azure Automanage, and how you can get a lot more benefit out of managing your servers with Azure's hybrid services. So let's take a look. So we'll start today with Azure Arc enabled servers, which is all about connecting hybrid machines into the clouds. You can get all the benefits of a cloud native design and world for these machines that are not running in that same cloud. And so this really sprung out of a lot of customer conversations we had where we were asking them, where do you run your apps? How are you developing today? And the answers were pretty consistent across the board. Customers have a variety of different application architectures. There's a traditional monolith still running on VMs and physical servers. There are containerized apps, as well as some that have been ported all the way to serverless functions and other platform as a service technologies. And these are running all over the place. There are distributed data centers across the world. There might be use of multiple cloud providers. It could even be in branch offices or on a computer running under someone's desk. And this is a pretty common story across all the customers we talk to. And it poses a lot of different challenges because it becomes difficult to understand what are all the resources that I'm responsible for managing as an IT administrator. How do we ensure all of these resources are secure and that we're collecting the right logs from them so that we can investigate should anything happen to them in the future? And there's a lot of good reasons to stay hybrid as well. It could be regulatory requirements that drive this disparate set of locations. It could be latency, making sure that your application is running where it's ingesting and sending data most efficiently. And it could also just be momentum. That server may have been running there for 10 years. There's no reason to move it to the cloud just yet. So we're just going to keep it there until its hardware is end of life. All of these are great reasons to maintain a hybrid strategy, but it doesn't simplify the problem of how do you simplify management across all these different data centers and resource types. And so that's our strategy with Microsoft Azure and Azure Arc in particular. We have a lot of experience building a global scale cloud with common control plane known as Azure Resource Manager that lets you manage your resources from anywhere in the world. You just ask us to create a VM, we handle all the rest for you. But for those resources running outside of Azure, there's really no visibility into them. And Arc is trying to change that by letting you take your Windows and Linux servers, your Kubernetes clusters, and your databases that are running on premises and have them show up in the Microsoft Azure cloud so that they are side by side with any resources you have natively running there and allowing you the same sort of API controls, portal experiences, and overall look and feel of something that's actually running in a Microsoft data center. We're also taking some of Azure's brand new services that are designed to run in the cloud and bringing them to your own data center. So for example, if you want to run a SQL managed instance with the latest version of SQL and pay-as-you-go pricing, you can run that on your own Kubernetes cluster in your own data center with Azure Arc. So we're expanding a whole world of new hybrid capabilities using a common technology and a single control plane. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what that control plane is. So this diagram here is kind of showing you the start to finish life of a resource in Azure. So, if you are a customer coming to us and you say, I'd like to make a VM, you might come through the portal, you might use Terraform, you might use command line, doesn't really matter. But that request is always going to start with Azure Resource Manager. That's our control plane. And there's a set of common experiences there that work across all resource types. So for example, as soon as you create that VM, we're going to check role-based access control. Do you have permission to create that VM where you asked us to? And then we'll check Azure policy and we'll say the type of VM you created and network you connected it to, is that allowed for you? And you can tag it and organize it into resource groups and subscriptions so that you can find it and organize your resources just as you need. And of course, everything you do can be audited through the log system built into Azure. And this is all a great experience for you as the VM owner, but it also simplifies management of all of your resources, because if you look at are higher level management services, things like monitoring or security center. These tools can all query Azure Resource Manager and say, hey, how many VMs do you have? We see that you have 100. We're only monitoring 80 of them. We should install the monitoring agent on those remaining 20 VMs so that we get all the insights we need to fully protect you and the applications running on those VMs. So the Resource Manager is really a really central part of how Azure runs. And with Azure Arc, what we're doing is we are extending Resource Manager so that your existing applications and servers that are running on premises or in another cloud can be projected into the Resource Manager and show up just like any other Azure resource. You can keep using your existing tools that you've invested in and the processes built around them to manage those servers. But by having it show up in Azure Arc, then you are able to also start leveraging some of the Azure services that could help simplify and unify the way you are managing these resources. So let's talk about some use cases. We have been generally available for almost a year now, and we've seen a ton of great examples of how customers are using Azure Arc enabled servers. So first off, from a basic inventory perspective, just getting visibility into all the servers you have in a single place is a huge win. And that's just enabled by installing our agent, assigning some tags, and you're good. You can really use that as kind of a very basic configuration database of all the servers you have running. Once the servers are there, though, you get a ton of different capabilities added. So the next big one that we see a lot of customers move into is policy and governance. So with Azure Policy, you're able to enforce things like automatically deploying agents to these servers so that they are monitoring and sending data up into Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center, Azure Defender, whatever tools you're using to help protect and monitor your workloads. You can also use policies to evaluate settings on a server. So if you want to go make sure that all the servers you have a particular setting set just as your IT department expects, for example, let's make sure TLS 1.2 is enabled, then you can define an Azure policy, deploy it to all your servers, and get centralized reporting on how those policies are being evaluated. And then lastly, from an identity perspective, if you're developing applications that talk to other Azure services, so for example, if you're a developer with secrets that your app needs to retrieve from an Azure Key Vault, you can use the managed identity. That's an Azure Active Directory native identity made available on that machine, where we take care of rotating that password for you every 90 days automatically. You never actually have to hard code a password into your application, but you can leverage it from Azure Arc and go talk to other Azure services, greatly reducing the amount of risk you have by hard coding any credentials into your application. So, it's really about making these hybrid servers get a much more cloud native experience by giving them that visibility in that control plane and common tooling from inside the VM that you'd expect were you deploying a VM directly on Azure. So as far as what you can support with Azure Arc, installing our agent's really the only part you have to do. You install the agent connected into Azure and you're good to go. The rest you can manage directly from the cloud. We support SUSE 15. We're soon to support SUSE 12 as well, and of course Windows Server and a variety of other Linux distributions. Once you get Arc installed, you can pick and choose which Azure services you want to use on that machine. So for example, if policy is interesting to you, you can get started with that. If you're looking for security solutions, Azure Defender and Azure Sentinel are your go-tos for that. Or if you just want to get some better inventory and update management, those solutions are available as well. You pick and mix whichever ones make sense for you, and Azure Arc's there to help make the onboarding of each of those services even easier. So let's go take a look at Azure Arc in action. All right, so we are here in the Azure portal, looking at all of the resources I have in Azure. I can go here to Azure Arc and take a look at those that are running in a hybrid fashion. So if I go over here to servers, you'll see a list of all my Arc-enabled servers that I've onboarded to my Azure subscription. Let's go take a look at my SLES 15 VM here. And while this loads, what we're seeing now is a single page in Azure that has brought together all of the Azure services This server, which is running on my computer here in Boston, is leveraging from Azure. So for example, it could use things like update management, monitoring insights, and policy. As a server admin, I only need to go to this one page to get access to all of these tools in one spot. Similarly, the role-based access control can apply in a similar way, such that you don't have to give everyone access to every data for all your servers. You can pick and choose. The server admins for a particular application only get to see the data for their servers. So let's go take a look at some of the things you can do with Azure Arc. Let's start with policy. So we mentioned policy is a real core component of governance in Azure. It's really useful for getting a quick view as to whether or not your machines are compliant. You'll see here right away, I got a list of all the policies that are in scope for this server, and 2 of them are non-compliant. So let's look at this first one. This is a password policy that's checking best practices for password configuration on that machine. Of all the policies down below, we'll see I am non-compliant for just one of them, the one here that's audit Linux machines that allow remote connections from accounts without passwords. This is checked every 15 minutes and it determined in the last check that it was not compliant. So it reported back up to Azure, and now I, as a server admin, have a quick view to say, I need to go make a change to that setting before our next audit because this is a non-compliant policy. We have a lot of built-in policies you can get started with, and the same policy is going to work across Azure VMs and anything that's been Arc enabled. And you can also build your own policies. So if there's something else you want to check, a particular setting, something specific to a line of business app, for example, you can write your own policies and push them out and get the same compliance information leveraging this policy platform for pretty much anything that you can write a script for and test. So it's a beautifully powerful platform. And if you're in central IT wondering, how do I use this to understand the state across my entire environment? Well, you can also kind of zoom out and say, I'd actually rather look at my entire subscription, all my servers. And here you'll get that top level view where it says, look, I'm like 75% compliant here. Here's all of my machines that we have and the single policies. You can drill in and say, what is, which 2 machines are non-compliant with this. And as you drill through, you'll be able to figure out, these are the ones I need to go and talk to the server admin to get those fixed or push out a script to automate that for me. So that's Azure policy as it applies to Azure Arc, but there's a lot of other services you can leverage too. For example, update management is Azure's free service for being able to check which packages are missing on your Linux servers and being able to schedule when those get updated. So for example, you could create a regular schedule that says, hey, for all my servers that run this particular application, their updates should go out on the 3rd Sunday of the month. And I want that to be between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. And if it takes longer than those 2 hours to install the updates, just hold the remaining updates. We'll get to those in the next update cycle. And so you'll see here a list of all those updates that are missing. Just like with the other view, we can go and look at this for multiple machines. So if you're looking across the entire enterprise, here's all my servers. This one's missing a security update on Windows, so this one's non-compliant, but the other ones, these are just package updates for other dependencies on the system, so they're not critical. We can go and schedule those whenever we need. And for a particular update, you can go and see how many machines are missing that update and drill in and figure out what groups of machines you want to put in the next update schedule. So that's, again, a free solution available in Azure for Arc machines. You can also do things like software inventory and change tracking. So if you want to enumerate all the software packages that are installed on your servers as well as the versions, for example, if you want to go and query who's using this particular licensed piece of software and on how many machines are we currently running it, this is a great tool to collect that information centrally and keep track of that over time. Change tracking, of course, is looking at when did someone install software or remove it, being able to audit those kinds of events. Now, for all these tools, there's some agentry that is involved to go and collect this information. Arc has this extension platform to go and do that for you. So you never actually had to sign into the machine to start collecting this information. Arc here, you can see, pushed out the agents that were required to go and configure and start sending up the log data that's used by like update management and inventory to understand what is happening on these servers. So the real benefit of Arc is that you don't ever have to go back in that machine to go and configure an Azure service to work with it. We will do all that coordination for you. Lastly, I just want to point out Azure Monitor Insights here. Azure Monitor is awesome for collecting logs both from applications with App Insights, as well as the infrastructure they run on with Azure Monitor for VMs. So we're looking here at the performance view, so I can see resource utilization on my server over time. I could set an alert to trigger a webhook or message me an email whenever I exceed a certain threshold of CPU usage over the last 15 minutes, for example. And you can also collect arbitrary logs with Azure Monitor. So if you want to understand system events as well as specific events for your application, you can instrument that with Azure Monitor, and then you'll be able to query it at whenever you want in the Azure portal or command line, set a retention policy that makes sense for that data, and understand what's happening across all your servers at scale. All right. So that was a real quick intro to Azure Arc and some of the management services that we tie into. I want to hand off now to Alfred, who's going to talk about Azure Automanage.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so after seeing Ryan's demo, I hope you're wondering, hey, how do I get those services onto my Arc server? Because that's exactly what we're trying to do with Azure Automanage. Before we do that, though, let's do a little bit of level setting. So let's talk about some of the customer challenges that we're trying to address with Automanage. And the fundamental one is the fact that IT management is complex. There's this continual operational overhead that you have to deal with as an admin. Obviously, backup, updates, monitoring, preparing for disaster recovery. Those are all things that's just work that you have to do on a day-to-day basis to keep your machines running smoothly. The security is obviously a big piece. There's always a growing threat of security, like vulnerabilities and whatnot, that you have to stay up to date with. And then another piece that we've heard from customers, at least, is that it's tough to keep pace with cloud innovation. So, the various cloud providers, ourselves included, are always building new features, and these features are aimed to help you in your operational overhead. But there's so many new features, and there's such a pace of them, and managing your VMs in the cloud requires you to continually stay on top of this. So these are some of the challenges that we've heard from customers that have had to deal with potential cloud migrations. And I mean, those aren't just hypothetical, right? Here's some real quotes that we've got from a couple different customers. Developers don't want to manage servers or spend their time on menial tasks. And basically anything that simplifies the day-to-day management of the operating system itself is a differentiator. So with that feedback, we went and asked customers, how does the cloud help you if you were to move to the cloud? And what we got in response was basically, there's actually not much motivation to refactor some of these line of business workloads to cloud native. Like, the cloud native development pattern is great, but if something's working, then really there's no reason to fix it. So that's one blocker that customers saw. And then, of course, the other one was the fact that the cloud is just a different environment to incur the same operational overhead. As an example, you have monitoring on premise, you're probably going to have monitoring in the cloud. You do patching on premise, you're going to have to do patching in the cloud. So there's really no OpEx improvement. And then to make matters worse, it's hard to maintain lockstep with how fast the cloud is changing. So not only do you have to do patching in the cloud, you have to learn how to do patching in the cloud. And obviously, Ryan just showed you in the demo that it can be super simple with update management. But then the question becomes, how do you set update management up properly, right? How do you maintain that? How do you keep those machines configured? I'll get to that in a moment. But basically, the lessons that we learned from all of our customer feedback before we stood up Automanage was basically, there are tons of these line of business applications that are running out there, and they're sticking around, they're running around in virtualized environments, or they're just running in bare metal on premise. They're not really going anywhere quickly. Again, why fix what ain't broken, right? And then we had to ask ourselves, look, can we simplify and add value to these classical computing scenarios? Like, what is missing here? And in order to address that, let's look at kind of the the model that we might all be familiar with, which is, IaaS and PaaS and SaaS. When you're moving to the cloud, most people generally, you'll move to IaaS first, just do a lift and shift, keep things familiar, and then look to re-platform to, any sort of cloud native application patterns. But it's a big jump going from IaaS up to PaaS. You're still, not only are you trying to solve for updates on a short-term basis, as an example, but you're trying to figure out how moving to PaaS, for example, might address that in the future. So again, the question becomes, what are we missing to help customers move and make that jump? Well, we came up with this notion of an operating system as a service. If you recall a few slides ago, one of the customers mentioned anything that helps with the OS would be a differentiator. And our goal here is to replace, those repetitive day-to-day administrative and operational tasks with an exception-only management model. So things like, updates and, change tracking and backup and monitoring, that is all stuff that we think can be automated. It's repetitive, it's predictable. So if it's predictable, then it can be automated. And then if it's automated, then you really don't need to know about it until an exception has occurred. So this is all nice sounding concepts and whatnot. Your question is probably, well, how does this manifest itself as a product? Well, this is where we kind of coined the product name Azure Automanage VM best practices. So there's a set of best practices out there that we will have your virtual machines adhere to. These involve onboarding your virtual machine to select curated services. And then we, as the Automanage service, will monitor those VMs across their entire lifecycle. And then if your VMs ever drift away from that best practice conformance state, we'll actually bring it back in conformance with that state. So what exactly is that best practice state? Well, there is a white paper called the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. It's actually publicly available, so you can search it up using your favorite search engine. Within that white paper, we lay out a bunch of different areas that should have some management best practices. So these include backup, security, monitoring, change tracking, VM updates, automation, OS baselines, and threat and malware protection. So I'm not going to read each individual thing line by line, but those are the areas that we touch on within Automanage. These are the services that we automatically onboard you to, which means that one, you don't have to figure out what these services are and what names they go by and what problems they solve. Two, you don't have to figure out how to onboard them. And three, you don't have to worry about it over the course of your VM's lifecycle, because you just point, click, set, and forget, and all of this is taken care of for you. So let's go over that one more time. Again, Automanage will eliminate the discovery and will onboard you to the services. Those services get configured. You get a baseline configured on your VM as well. And I'll touch upon this a little bit more in the demo, but we do apply an operating system baseline within the VM level. And then we'll automatically monitor for drift and correct it across the VM's entire lifecycle. I'll give you guys the portal demo, but know that we also have an Azure policy for at-scale scenarios, and we also have an ARM template available, an Azure Resource Manager template that you can use to onboard your VMs also at scale onto Automanage. Now, before we dive into the demo, I'll just quickly display a list of the supported operating systems, because that's a question that we always get. Obviously, SLES 12 and SLES 15 are in there, and then here are the rest of them. All right, so let's hop over into the demo. So here is my Azure portal. You can see I've got it open to the Azure Arc page. So I've got this virtual machine sitting around that I'm just going to SSH into and give myself sudo into. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this virtual machine an Arc server. It'll show up in this list after we're done with it. And at that point, you can do everything that Ryan just showed you in his demo to that Arc server. We're going to take that Arc server, and we're also then going to onboard it to Azure Automanage, which will configure everything for that virtual machine / Arc server automatically. So let's go ahead and walk through the Arc onboarding process. So I'm going to automatically generate a script. I'm going to create a resource group or stick it in a resource group. Select the relevant details. So the region, I'm based in Seattle, so I'll just choose a close region nearby. And then it's obviously going to be a Linux operating system. Let's keep it simple and not have any tags. And now there's a whole installation script here that we're going to run. I'm just going to copy it. And we're just going to paste the script in, bring that into the VM. And then we'll run it. All right, that was fast. Now, to show you what it looks like, we will see another SLES 15 machine show up here. So this is the SLES 15 demo. Let's remember that name. So SLES 15 demo is the name of the Arc server. So now let's go to Automanage. I have it in the portal here, but I'm going to show you that you can search for it as well. So Automanage, we are in public preview right now, so you can search for it in the portal wherever you are. And then we're going to hit enable on existing machines. So we don't actually need this anymore, so I can show you the whole screen here. Now, in the enablement workflow, there's kind of three main stages. There's machines, there's the configuration stage, and then there is the advanced step, which I'll show you in a second. It basically involves an identity. But for machines, you'll see I've got a nice big list of VMs. Let's just onboard a bunch of random ones. I think I've selected 2 virtual machines and 1 Arc server. One point I will make is we actually don't really care about the type of machine. So it can be an Arc server, it can be a virtual machine, it can be running Linux, it can be running Windows. It'll show up in this UI, so we'll just take it. Configuration. So let's talk about the environments for a sec. So we have 2 different environments that we can apply to your virtual machine / Arc server. There's the production and there's the dev test. So let's have a look at the details for them. So for production, you get monitoring, update management, change tracking, guest configuration and the baseline, and then some supplemental resources, so like an automation account and log analytics workspace if you're running an Arc server. You get the full array of services if you're running an Azure virtual machine. The big difference between production and dev test is that in the dev test environment, you don't get monitoring and you don't get backup. And the reason for this is backup does incur a bit of a fee to store your backup somewhere, a little bit of the storage fee. And then monitoring also incurs a little bit of a fee to store your metrics somewhere. And in dev test, you probably don't care enough about either monitoring or backup to want to pay that extra fee. And the one thing that I promised you I would talk about is the guest configuration baseline. So we have an operating system baseline for both Windows and Linux. For Windows, it's the Azure Windows baseline. For Linux, it is, surprise, surprise, the Azure Linux baseline. And that is, the Linux baseline is installed in audit-only mode. So there's a bunch of security, like I guess, line items that you can then get to compare your server against the baseline and see kind of where your server might differ from our security baseline. Now, we don't automatically remediate it, but we will point out where it might not be in compliance. So you can choose whether or not you want to remediate or not. And then the final thing I'll touch upon is, well, actually, let's talk about preferences. So we've got Azure best practices here. We can create custom preferences if you want, and then you can change whether or not you want, how often you want backup to run on your machine. And then you can also change how often, some of the settings about anti-malware, so you can enable or disable it. As you can see on the screen, these are currently not supported on Azure Arc yet, but if you're running a standard virtual machine on Automanage, this will work for you. And then Automanage as a service, we require an identity to run. So this Automanage account is our identity under advanced. It's under advanced because if you do nothing, we'll just create it for you. So we hit enable, we'll see it show up. And then our 3 resources will be onboarded to Automanage, and they'll have all those services automatically configured. Now let's pop back to the slide deck. All right, so here is Azure Automanage. We're currently in public preview for both Linux and Windows, and our pricing is actually another question that we get a lot. We are a free service, so we don't charge anything to use Automanage VM best practices, but note that some of the underlying services we enroll will incur some usage fees. So again, if you're using the production environment, for example, on a virtual machine, you'll get charged a little bit for the Azure Backup Vault storage, and a tiny little bit for monitoring metric storage. Now, we've got a few things on our roadmap. You just saw a demo of Automanage over Arc. That's currently approaching private preview. So on the next slide, I'll give you a link to a form to fill out if you would like to join us in this private preview. And then we've got some things under the Automanage umbrella that we're really looking forward to. So something like a workload-aware patch orchestration service that builds upon the update management services that Azure currently provides. We've got machine learning-backed resource exhaustion forecasting and VM right-sizing features in the pipeline as well. Those are features for which we currently have proofs of concept for, and are slowly working towards productizing. So the obvious question, just to be super crystal clear, you heard Ryan give you an overview of Azure Arc and give you a demo of an Azure Arc server and all the capabilities that it has. Then you saw me talk about Automanage, and I kind of meshed the two together by giving you a demo of onboarding an Arc server along with some VMs onto Automanage. So the answer to probably this question, how did they work together, is yes, they work together. But this feature is entering private preview soon. So what you saw was a kind of a private build on my own computer. But if you want to join us on this private preview, we have a form here. Go to this aka.ms link, fill it out, and you'll hear back from us, and we'll kind of get you into that private preview. So if you're interested in, archifying your SLES servers anywhere, and then bringing those onto Azure Automanage and having us, automatically onboard you and keep you configured to those best practices, you'll be able to do that. So yeah, on behalf of Ryan and myself, we thank you very much for your time wherever you are today. And yeah, have a good one.